Available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official.
This is Akashvani. In the program Money Talk, we now bring you a discussion on record number of patents, fostering innovation and knowledge-driven economy. The participants are Dilip Chennoy, former Secretary General FICCI, and Lalima Aneja, anchor.
It's interesting to note that India filed 66,440 patent applications, thus showing an increase of 13.57% as compared to the previous year. As India goes to become the world's fifth largest economy, it is important that we maintain our talent pool and invest in them and retain them too, if possible, and if possible, reverse brain drain. So where do we figure ourselves as far as research and innovation go? For this and more, we are now joined by Mr. Dilip Chennoy, former General Secretary, FICCI. Welcome, sir, to Akashvani.
Thank you, Lalima.
So we see that though our filing of patents has gone up and our research and development spending has gone down, albeit marginally, do you see a bit of a dichotomy there?
Actually, the challenge here is that there are 2 or 3 different ways that the spending on research is actually calculated. One is looking at what the government entities spend on research and which they declare. And the second is what industry actually reports. Before 2016, there was an incentive for companies to report the data and the spend that they do on R&D because there was a weighted deduction and a kind of income tax exemption if they reported the numbers. Over the past few years, that has been kind of reduced and it is now just a revenue expenditure. So a lot of companies are not necessarily reporting the R&D figures that they do under the R&D, and it is going under a different head. And if you look at the last 2.5 years or 3 years after taking the COVID period, their companies were actually investing significant amounts in R&D, but it was not called R&D because it was coming under their operations, etc., because they had to pivot to new forms of business, innovate new ways to reach the customer, etc. So maybe in actual practice, the amount of money being spent on R&D innovation has not gone down, but the reporting is certainly skewed in that direction.
Research and development spending is among the lowest in the world, and even Niti Aayog seems to be worried about it. We spend only 0.7% of GDP on research and development, but the developed nations like US spends 2.9%, Sweden 3.2%, Switzerland 3.4%, Israel, highest in the world, of course, notwithstanding the present condition, whopping 4.5% of its GDP. It is said generally that we should be spending at least 3% of GDP. How do you compare, now a corollary question, how do you compare the role of private and government players in the whole research and development process?
You are right in the sense that if you take the average of the R&D spend as a percentage of GDP, we are among the lowest spending nations in the world. It is also correct that some of the industry segments do not spend that much as a percentage of the turnover on R&D. But if you look at a more disaggregated industry kind of analysis, there are segments where if I were to look at automotive and if I were to look at pharmaceuticals, whether it's 8% or 1.7% in India, of their spend on R&D, we are fairly close to international averages. The place where we are also challenged is because in many developed countries and many other systems, the amounts of grants given to national institutions and given to others are significantly large. And therefore, when we look at that as a percentage of GDP, it seems much lower in India. There are many sectors and many other companies in India and sectors that do not spend as much on R&D. So I think there is a need, if you look at it, for multiple things to actually happen. We need to think of new innovative ways to fund R&D. We also need greater industry academic kind of collaboration. And third, we need to encourage the private sector and others to spend on R&D in India.
What makes the private sector hesitant, considering the fact that we have allowed 2% of profit of the industry to go into CSR? Can't CSR take care of the R&D a bit? Can't they take care of that sector through this CSR channel?
See, it's very interesting. The CSR is used for purposes where there's a common good. So if you're looking at R&D and CSR, and if malaria is a big problem, then you might have CSR funding malaria research, or you might have CSR funding COVID research, which happened during the COVID. But that is only a small section of R&D in the overall universe. As CSR, why would someone donate to fund individual company research, which will be beneficial to a company or an entity? On societal challenges, on societal issues, CSR may work, but in the other way, it will not actually work going forward.
So we have a whole lot of IITs among the best education institutes of the country, though not necessarily in the top 100 of the world. I think Mumbai came in the recent survey. Anyway, but we do know that they do foster innovation in their own way by holding exhibitions, and we come across students from IITs with great innovation. Is the ecosystem now conducive to have those innovations get patents and involve them into the mainstream society? Because invention is one thing, but getting it into mainstream is another. Have we cut down on red tapeism and so on?
I think there are two parts to your question, and let me quickly address something which the government has done for the IIT ecosystem. So they have Uttachar Avishkar Yojana, UAY, which promotes industry-sponsored and outcomes. So outcome-oriented research, there's a 475 crore outlay for this, which 25% is actually contributed by industry. This is a kind of impacting research and innovation technologies imprint, and it focuses on socially relevant research in higher education institutions. And what has happened is that 9 research parks with an outlay of total cost of 775 crores have been done, and 8 of them are in the IITs and 1 in the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. And I think what they are showing is these research parks will propel innovation through incubation and joint research between academia and industry. And there is also Prime Minister's Research Fellow Scheme, which is launched with an outcome of 1,650 crores there to incentivize the most meritorious students to pursue research in the frontier areas of science. And then, of course, more recently, we've had the NRF thing passed where they're looking at 36,000 crores over a period of next 5 years to be raised to promote R&D in this segment. The second thing that has actually happened here is Patents Office comes under the Ministry of Commerce, Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. And there have been a whole lot kind of modernization programs and communication programs and outreach programs to actually help people with patent filing, patent understanding, etc. Many of the universities and others and the Ministry of Small Industry and other organizations and Startup India and Stand Up India are all helping with this filing patent applications and addressing that. It's still work in progress. Companies will always come back and say that some things are not working, but I think there is a tremendous change in what has happened over the last few years in this space.
I think we now have the world's 3rd largest number of startups in the country and so many unicorns. That reflects kind of government's promotion towards patents and Atmanirbhar Bharat. We just spoke about research and development and patents and encouraging innovation in the higher education. So when we talk about children in the primary section or in schools, we have a fantastic scheme called the Atal Tinkering Labs, ATL as we call it in short. At the moment, 10,000 Atal Tinkering Labs are there, spanning across states and union territories. 5,800 mentors of change, 75 lakh students engaged in it, and 60% of government and government-aided schools involved in it. It covers 12 lakh innovation projects which have been cleared. That sounds very good. And what is your take on Atal Tinkering Labs as a means to foster curiosity, creativity, and imagination among young minds?
Lalima, this is a very important aspect that you brought about. I think something which was lacking in the whole primary and middle and senior education space was this thing about getting kids hooked to science and experimentation and curiosity and using their kind of 5 senses. Because normally when you actually went into school, all you did was listen to a teacher, write in the notebook and go back. And, the practicals were also limited. The Atal Tinkering Labs started in a small way, and under the Niti Aayog, it started there. They actually took a person out from industry and got him to head this organization. And the funding that the government gave and the whole process that they sent up actually created a huge network of these tinkering labs across different schools, not only in urban areas, but in rural areas, and enabled kids to experiment and to get a kind of technology mindset, a curiosity mindset, a thing of doing with their hands mindset, etc. So it is a very important step. And some of the state governments also added to this program, and schools also started introducing this. So this is a very, very important step taken over the last few years to actually enable that to happen. And of course, there are other programs about women in science. And if you look at during the whole Chandrayaan launch, the Prime Minister also talked about this. So there are many initiatives here. I'm in the Web3 space now, in the blockchain space. And, if you look at the leadership at CDAC, a lot of there in this leading cutting edge of technology are women who are leading this. So you are seeing children and women who are typically left out of this whole ecosystem being included in the process. And then rather than looking at only college and IITs and all of that, and there are a lot of schools that are setting up incubators based on this. I'm alumni of a school in Hyderabad, and one of the batches has set up incubator for school kids. Earlier, people would frown at school kids developing something in incubator and possibly making something commercial out of it. So I think that is also changing. And a major push to this and a major contribution is this is whole Startup India and Stand Up India initiative that has been so ably promoted by the ministry and under the guidance of the Prime Minister, so that they're looking at recognizing. Earlier, there was a social kind of a hesitancy for parents to allow their kids to go into business or to go and to join a startup or to join something like this. Now, the social barriers also are breaking, and it's going to add tinkering labs. The question that you actually asked are going to add to the comfort of parents and children to experiment and take risks going forward.
Mr. Chennoy, when it comes to patents, we find that many multinational companies try to encroach upon our traditional systems of medicine. We do have TKDL, which is the traditional knowledge digital library, where we have patented, or rather digitized, lakhs of pages from Ayush so that the formulae are not stolen. But we still had problems like somebody from outside India claiming patent on our neem and haldi. And of course, hull wheat has gone already, the patent for hull wheat, which is our traditional wheat. Is TKDL enough for this kind of system so that we can protect our formulae or Ayurvedic formulae from getting patented from the MNCs abroad?
There are two examples that you take, and one of the examples, I remember at that point of time, and coincidentally, there was an article written about this which highlighted the role of Dr. Ramesh Mashelkar, who was the head of the whole research ecosystem at that point in time, kind of challenging the patent granted to the products that you mentioned. And therefore, we actually needed to fight it out and do that. So one of the suggestions that came out of that is we should actually quickly put this traditional things in a database and put in there, because what is very clear is patentability is actually based on three factors, right? It has to be innovative, it has to be useful, and it should not be known or common sense. So if we put all of this out in the public domain, then nobody can patent that because we can prove that this was known and this was common sense. And I think what we need to do as a nation, there individual people also need to contribute, is to keep monitoring the patent application database and putting, it's very easy to do keywords, etc. And when and if somebody comes up putting a patent in some of the areas that are available, we should actually launch a systematic challenge that was done under Dr. Mashelkar at that point of time. So we need to make it a national movement rather than just depending on the government to do it. And given the patent laws in different countries, and you have to request for grant of patent, etc. So as a country, we need to develop maybe a public-private partnership to actually address this going forward.
I think we're now granting a lot many products geographical indication that also may prevent stealing of our things by big companies, especially from outside India. I think that also should help. And all in all, I think we are finally creating an ecosystem where more and more patents can be filed and successful. Thank you very much, Dr. Chennoy, for being with us and throwing light on some of these developments and positive developments, particularly in the field of patents for our country.
Thank you, Lalima. It was a pleasure being with you.
You were listening to a discussion on record number of patents, fostering innovation and knowledge-driven economy. The participants were Dilip Chennoy, former Secretary General FICCI, and Lalima Aneja Dang, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.